Hi, boys and girls. This is Grandma Sheilla, and I have this week's story for you. It's called How the Cows Came Home. Well, our story starts in the local church. The minister, he had been holding meetings, and that morning at church, he had taught the adults their lesson. Then he had told a story to the children in church, and then he had preached the sermon. And when church was all over, he went out in the foyer of the church and started shaking hands with all the people. Well, when everybody had left, he was so tired. He'd been working really hard. So he went inside of the church and he went up the center aisle all the way to the front, and he sat down on the very first pew. He was so tired that he leaned back with his head on the back of the pew, and he had his eyes closed. And then he heard something. It was the sound of little feet coming up the aisle. And he thought, oh, they can't see me here. I'll just keep my eyes closed. I don't have to wake up. But the sound of those little feet kept coming. And then he thought, I bet somebody left their Bible on one of the pews, or maybe they forgot their hymnal. Pretty soon, they got right by that pew where the pastor had been trying to take a nap. And he looked around, and there stood a little girl. He thought, she can't be more than 6 or 7. Then she came around the edge of the pew, and she got really close to his ear. And she said, Uncle. Well, this person was always called Uncle Arthur, the writer of all the bedtime storybooks. And the little girl said, Uncle, I want to tell you a story. And he said, That's wonderful. So she started her story. She said, Uncle, my grandma just lives on the other side of town out in the country. And sometimes she doesn't feel good, and I have to go help. And Grandma has cows. And Uncle Arthur said, Do you help your grandma with the cows too? And she said very solemnly, Oh, yes, I help Grandma and I help with the cows. He said, Well, that's very nice. And she said, I want to tell you something that just happened. Do you know what it is? And he said, No, but can you tell me? And she said, Okay. And she said, When I was at my grandma's house, helping her, sometimes she needs help. She lives there all by herself. And he asked again, Do you help? Oh, yes, I help. I help with Grandma and I help with the cows, she said again. And then she said, well, one day when I was at Grandma's house, I went over to look out the kitchen window. And do you know what I saw? And he said, no, tell me. And she said, I saw the gate to the cows open, and I saw one cow walking right out of the gate, went right down the ditch and got up on the highway and started walking toward town. And he said, what did you do? She said, I stood there watching, and all the cows followed. They all went through the gate, and they got up on the highway, and they didn't start walking. They started running toward town. And he said, what did you do? She said, I went outside. I thought I could stop them. But she said, by the time I got up on the highway, they were so far down the road, there was no way I could run fast enough to catch them and turn them around. And Uncle Arthur said, oh no. Then what did you do? She said, I tried running after them, but it was no use. Then I started calling to them, come home, you naughty cows. Come home. Stop. Did they stop? No. They were naughty. They didn't even listen to me. I wonder if the cows even heard her. And he said, well, then what did you do? She said, I knelt down on the highway and I folded my hands like they've taught us in Sabbath school, and I closed my eyes and I said, please, Jesus, send the naughty cows home. And Uncle Arthur said, then what happened? And she grinned great big. She said, I stood there on the road and I watched them turn around, and as fast as they had left, they came running down the highway. And when the first cow got to me, she looked at me. She knew she wasn't supposed to be out. And she turned around, she went down the ditch and right into the fence, right through the gate. And you know, all the other cows followed her, one after another. And then Uncle Arthur said, then what did you do? She said, I went over as quick as I could, and I shut and I latched the gate so they couldn't come out again. And he said, that's just what you should have done. And she said, then I went into the house and I told Grandma all about it. Well, boys and girls, I'm sure that when the angels heard that prayer, that little 7-year-old girl asking Jesus to bring the naughty cows home, I'm sure the angels went right to work. God loves to answer children's prayers, and he does. You know, I am so glad that we love a God that hears and answers our prayers no matter how old we are. Thank you, boys and girls, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.